built international standard tracks like Sydney's Warwick Farm and Melbourne's Sandown attracted the cream of the world's Grand Prix drivers, and some of the largest crowds ever drawn to any Australian sporting event at the time. World champions John Surtees, Jim Clark, Graham Hill and our own Jack Brabham all raced here in the year that they won their world titles, and in cars which reflected the latest international technology. On the surface, Australian motor racing was in great shape. But was it really? For every international track they built, it seemed, another club circuit disappeared. Mount Druitt, Nublar, Catalina Park. While the established drivers were having a field day, the nursery grounds were being ploughed under. In 1961, a group of concerned amateurs found a likely-looking cow pasture outside Camden, and with the help of its owner Dan Cleary, they built the most rudimentary of one-mile tracks. On Sunday, February 18, 1962, Oran Park opened for business. They ran 18 races that day, twice the number of some of the bigger circuits. The longest race was just 12 miles, and the fastest car on the track wasn't a Lotus or a Cooper, but a near-to-home-made Nota, powered by a 1000cc four-cylinder Ford. Warren, what was the first meeting like?
Very, very rough. The track was, from my memory, wasn't even sealed. It was oil-sealed dirt, and most competitors broke their windscreen, and I can remember now that they refunded our entry money to pay for the windscreen.
Well, and you went on from the Morris Minor you raced at the first meeting to race very successfully in the early model Holdens.
That's correct, John. I raced early model Holdens for about 5 or 6 years and went on to an EH after that.
But you never really hit the great heights like the Gagans. What happened?
I would say financial assistance mainly stopped me. I was only a battler. When I first started racing, I was only an apprentice.
Is it different now? I mean, could you get back into motor racing now and fund it?
I'd like to think that I could. I'd like to think that I haven't lost the touch I had in those days, but I think there's more opportunities around today than there was then.
Success came as something of a surprise to Oran Park. Designed purely for the enjoyment of the club racer, and in terms of track surface barely adequate for the task, the first meeting attracted almost 2,000 paying spectators. To the onlookers' delight, they found that for almost a third of the track's distance, they could stand so close to the action that they could be sprayed with gravel and go home with tyre shreds in their hair. Quite unwittingly, the park had struck on a magic formula, a combination of traditional motor racing with the flair of speedway. With the promise of the big time before it, it took just 2 years for the nursery track to cast off its diapers. In late 1963, the original promoters, the Singer Car Club, became the far more appropriately named New South Wales Road Racing Club, and the track grew another corner, Enegol, now Castrol, putting spectators virtually in the driver's seat. But there were some seats it was best not to be in. At only his second meeting, this young man inverted his Holden-powered MGTC over the dogleg, rolling almost into Enegol. Dragged from the wreck and spitting front teeth, the aggressive young Wyong pastry cook gasped, "Get the car on its wheels, I want to get going." And then he collapsed. His name, of course, was Alan Grice. The big time did come to Warren Park. From 1963 to 1967, the lap records seesawed between two all-time greats, Frank Matic in his Lotus 19 sports car, and Leo Gagan in a succession of Lotus open-wheelers. Matic opened batting with a 49-second lap, and the record tumbled to 46.4 before two other drivers, Neil Allen and the Holden dealer team's John Harvey, entered the fray. In 1972, Matic took it back again, a sensational 39-second lap in his own Matic A50. So quick was the time that the record stood for 11 years before Andrew Medicki shaved just 1/10 of a second off it to leave it at 38.9. But sports cars and open-wheelers weren't the big news of Oran Park. It was touring cars. As early as 1964, Pete Gagan's Lotus Cortina and a clutch of FJ Holdens brought spectators cramming to the fences. Totally innovative, or plagiarising speedway, depending on your viewpoint, the park introduced night racing in 1966 and put the local drive-in movies out of business. Big, fire-breathing series production cars were driven by the new stars, John Goss, Fred Gibson, Bob Morris.
John Goss, what was it like racing the big Falcons and other touring cars of the early 70s?
I suppose it was always a lot of fun, Will, and in many ways it's not unlike what we're doing here today, but basically they were production cars. We had fairly serious limitations with tyres, but although when I look back on it, I think it was fun. We were pretty serious about it at the time, and so it meant that we were looking for those 100ths of a second. I can remember a day here, Will, when Alan Moffat and myself were separated by 1/100th of a second for the 100-mile final of the Toby Lee series. That'll give you some idea of what it was like.
Legends were made every meeting. When Bob Morris lost a wheel at Sutton's Corner, he ploughed on, not for one, but for 2 laps, with flames shooting from the wheel well and the crowd on fire. The support races weren't bad either. A young Victorian ex-army conscript who shoehorned a Holden engine into his Austin A30 caught the eye of the park's manager, Alan Horsley. Unheard of in its day, Horsley offered the youngster travelling money to bring the car over the border. And Peter Brock's career received a much-needed boost.
Alan, what sort of help did you give Peter Brock?
We gave Peter a contract to come to Sydney and race at Oran Park, I think, for a period of 12 months. It was in the form of money. I'm not sure how much nowadays. It wouldn't have been too much.
Well, that was something fairly unusual, because I thought Oran Park's policy was not to pay starting money.
Oh, I think it was everybody's policy in those days, John, but Peter, even way back in those days, we discovered him in Whitten, and he had something special, and we decided to bring him up here, and of course he's gone on from there.
What other people did you help?
Oh, there were a lot of guys. Alan Moffat, I can remember Alan couldn't afford an engine at one stage, and we helped him out with that. There are a number, Barry Sharp, I can remember from the Sports Sedan days, where we bought the body shells for them, and there were a lot of drivers back in those early days.
By the early 70s, Oran Park dominated New South Wales motor racing. With the Australian Jockey Club unwilling to invest in its Warwick Farm complex, even the Australian Touring Car Championship defected to the park. In 1971, the touring car clash between Alan Moffat and Bob Jane brought 33,000 paying customers and page 1 coverage from the Sydney press. Jane won the race, but Moffat won the crowd. Big Al took reverse when he should have found second at Sutton's, and his fight back to catch, but not past Bob, became a contemporary classic. In 1974, Oran Park extended once again. A 2.6-kilometre Grand Prix track was added, putting 8 extra corners onto the track, but disappointingly reducing passing opportunities and slowing the lap average by more than 30 kilometres an hour. Hard on brakes and testing on suspension, the new circuit was a logical place for the 2 grandmasters, Jack Brabham and Sterling Moss, to test their Tirana prior to their somewhat embarrassing return to the world stage in the 1976 James Hardy 1000. Jammed in gear on the starting line, Brabham was tail-shunted and his race was over before it began.
The man who single-handedly brought more crowd to Oran Park in the 1960s than any other is 5 times Australian Touring Car Champion Ian Gagan. And Pete, you're back in the old days today.
Yes, John. It feels quite good to be here, and of course in the RVL.
There's much change to her from as you remember.
She's not changed all that much now. She's still there. It just sort of feels a little bit wobbly, I suppose, but that's the suspension in her era isn't sort of quite up with the suspensions of today, but I think all in all she's all there still.
You've got a chance today, of course, to find out what modern suspension's like. You're driving in the Commodore Classic.
Yes, I was always those
30 kilometres.
Talking of
promoters of Oran Park to head to that.
And Ian Gagan round the track in that Mustang, a car in which he raced 74 times. He took victory on 69 occasions, an unbelievable record. He set lap records at 14 circuits, and to me, even more remarkable than that was that at Bathurst, where today cars in the James Hardy are lapping at, low 220s, he, nearly 20 years ago, lapped at 226. That car had 470 horsepower, and the sight of he and Alan Moffat airborne, heading for the braking area, was awe-inspiring.